Hey everybody, I want to take a few moments to talk about a subject that's dear to my heart, and I'm kind of irritated about Amazon. Yeah, Amazon has decided that they should make an abridged version of It's a Wonderful Life Christmas movie. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen this movie, but I have seen it every year for God knows how long. Probably probably 50 years would be a safe estimate. But Amazon's decided to make an abridged version, which that just means that they're cutting part of it out. And what they did, they cut the best part of it out. Now, I don't know how many of you, like I might have said before, I don't know how many of you have seen It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart. But it has a story, and it has a good learning lesson. I want you to think about this for a moment. What do you think the world would be like if you had never been born? Let's just say that you had never been born, that you had never known the people that you know now, that you wouldn't have done things that may have helped other people, or likewise, you may have done things that harmed other people. But in the case of this movie, Jimmy Stewart, that plays George Bailey, which was a good man his entire life, and at the time this movie was cast, he was probably had been about 40 years old, maybe 35, 40 years old. But anyway, he had a family and he had 4 kids. And he was always trying to get out of his hometown and go do great things and travel the world. He wanted to be an architect. And he lived in a town named Bedford Falls, New York. Probably fictitious, I don't know for sure. But his entire life, he was trying to get out of this little town. And every time that he looked like he could go, something would come up where he couldn't go. So he stayed in town and was not making much money, was a director of a little loan association that his father had created. And the villain in the story is Old Man Potter, and he owns everything in town. He owns the slums and people that live there that don't make much money. He called them garlic eaters, which was Italians, was what he was referring to. But anyway, he said these garlic eaters live there and they wouldn't amount to much anyway. So they could pay these exorbitant prices for him to rent them a shack. So George Bailey come along, or his father before him, and started this little loan association, kind of like what we would call a credit union today. And people could come there and they could get houses built, they could get loans, even though they were low-income people. So Old Man Potter, he just hated this competition. He wanted to get his hands on that little savings and loan so bad he couldn't hardly stand it. But George Bailey was always in the way. And George Bailey, he had a little brother. We're turning back the times to when he was young. And as they were out on the ice, they were riding shovels. Like they'd sit in the middle of a shovel and somebody would shove them and they'd slide down this ice pond. Well, his little brother's name was Harry. And they pushed Harry and he slid down and he fell over the edge of the ice and into the cold water and was about to drown. And George jumped in and saved him, and he got cold and a fever in his ear made him lose healing, and he couldn't hear in his left ear. So anyway, the story goes that somehow George Bailey's uncle also worked at the loan institution, and he was kind of squirrely or eccentric or whatever you want to call it. And he was going to make a deposit on this from the loan association. It was $8,000. And somehow old man Potter came in, and the uncle was ribbing him and messing with him, and somehow he got his loan that he was going to deposit to the bank, that $8,000. He had laid it in a newspaper, and while he was agitating old man Potter, he forgot he left it in that newspaper, and old man Potter got the newspaper, took it to his office, and saw all that money was there. So when the uncle went back to the loan association, the bank examiner was there, and he didn't have that deposit. And all hell broke loose. And George Bailey was about to go nuts because he knew he was going to get the blame. And his brother had just won the Medal of Honor. This was during World War II. And he was coming home to a great reception from the town about him winning that Medal of Honor and all that. And the way he got that Medal of Honor was he was a pilot, and he shot down a Japanese plane right before it's fixing to sink a ship that had 1,500 American soldiers on it. So anyway, after all these things happen, when Bailey knows that he doesn't know what he's going to do. And he goes and he drinks and he gets drunk, and he's at his wit's end. So finally he decided that if nothing else, he'd relent and go beg old man Potter for a loan. Well, of course, old man Potter had that money, and he knew that there was no way that George Bailey could recover it. So he told George Bailey that he wasn't going to help him. In fact, he was going to call the law and tell them to come get him. And George had a little insurance policy, and old man Potter asked him if he had any collateral, and he had this little insurance policy, and it wasn't worth hardly anything. And old man Potter said, well, I can't take that for collateral. That's not enough. And he said, George Bailey, you know, you look like you're worth more dead than alive. And George Bailey, he just run out old man Potter's door and headed for the river. And he was thinking, I'd be better off if I was dead. My family would be better off, and they'd get that little bit of insurance money. Well, in the meantime, God had sent an angel down to help George Bailey. This angel's name was Clarence, and he was 200 years old. And he was trying to earn his wings. He hadn't earned his wings yet. And the way he could earn his wings was by helping George Bailey. So George Bailey gets to the river and is on this bridge, and he's looking down at that frigid water, and he's shaking his head. He was begging God to help him, and finally those words old man Potter said, well, you, George, you'd be better off dead than alive. He decided to commit suicide. So he got up on the rail and was fixing to jump into that icy water, and from up above, this body come down and hit that water ahead of him, and the guy started screaming, help, help. So George jumped in there and saved the guy. And they're in this bridge, they're in this little station there, a little transfer station, trying to get warm. Well, a man that had jumped in the river ahead of him to keep him from committing suicide was Clarence, his guardian angel. And he tells Clarence that he wished he had let him die. And Clarence said, no. He said, you saved me. He said, that was, you did what you should do. And Jimmy Stewart said, well, I've been begging God for help. And I just was at my wit's end. I was going to commit suicide. And Clarence said, well, no, George. He said, I'm your guardian angel. They sent me. Now, please let me help you so I can earn my wings. And George said, no, I wished I'd have never been born. I wished I'd have never been born. So the guardian angel, Clarence, he got the idea that maybe he ought to show George what it would have been like if he had never been born. So they go back to Bedford Falls, and everything's changed. Nightclubs are everywhere, and strip clubs are performing, naked women. It's just gone all to hell. And the name of Bedford Falls has been changed to Pottersville after old man Potter. So George said, what's going on? This is Bedford Falls. And Clarence told him, said, no, George, you were never born, so this is how it turned out. Old man Potter, he got everything. So he goes to his mother's house and beats on the door. Mom, let me in. Well, I don't know you. Who are you? And he said, oh, Mama, this is me, George. You know me. And she said, I've never heard of you, and get out of here before I call the police. So George asked Clarence, where's his wife? Where's Mary? Where is Mary? He said, well, George, she's working down at the library. He said, she never married. She's an old maid. And he said, Clarence, you're crazy. I married her. That's my wife, Mary. No, you were never born. So then they wind up in a graveyard, and there's a headstone there that says, Harry Bailey. Well, that was George's brother that he saved from drowning in the ice. And George goes berserk. He said, that's my brother Harry. So I saved him. He didn't die. And the Clarence, the guardian angel, said, no, George. Remember, you were never born. So Harry died. He drowned in that ice. You wasn't here to save him. And George said, no, he was a fighter pilot, and he shot down an enemy plane just as it was fixing to sink a ship loaded with American soldiers. Claire said, no, all 1,500 of those American soldiers died because, you see, George, you wasn't born. So you wasn't here to save Harry, and Harry died, so he wasn't there to save those 1,500 troops on that ship. So then George is just beside himself. And he goes back out to that bridge, and he's saying, God, I changed my mind. I don't wish that I'd never been born. Please, God, bring me back. Bring me back. And he's in tears. And about that time, this cop showed up that'd been looking for him. And he said, George, what's wrong with you? Where have you been? And George snaps to, and he says to that cop, you know me? He said, yeah, George, I'm one of your best friends. I know you. So George realizes then that he really had been born and that God answered his prayers. And Clarence got his wings, by the way. So George goes back to town, and the town is now back to to Bedford Falls, and everything's back to normal. And then it turns out that all the people turned out and gathered up all this money to actually triple what old man Potter had got, that 8,000. And Harry makes it back, and he has a hero's welcome. And anyway, that's how it turned out. George got all the money, everybody was happy, and old man Potter, well, we don't know what happened to him. He probably committed suicide. But the reason I took this time to tell you this story is getting back to Amazon and their abridged version. The part they cut out was about the part of George saying wished he'd never been born, and how the community was Pottersville, and then how it turned back into Bedford Falls and that everything was well and good. Amazon cut that out. They cut that out. And people like me who've loved this movie for years are outraged. So I just want to tell you, if you've never seen it, It's a Wonderful Life, George Stewart, or Jimmy Stewart. I got George on my mind. If you've never seen it and you want to see it, please don't look at that abridged version. About this time of the year, NBC Network runs it continuously, and they run the true version in its real form. The movie was made in 1946. I was 3 years old. So that tells you how long I've been associated with it. But be sure you watch the real version and watch it in black and white like it was made. They have some colorized versions that didn't change the content, but you got to see it in black and white. That's the way it came, and that's the way it's supposed to be. So I just had to come on and tell you that, and warn you about this abridged version by Amazon. Go see the real deal. And when you see it, try to see it without interruption, without any distractions. You'll get the message. And think about yourself. What would the world be like if you had never been born? That's all for now, folks. I'll see you on down the road. Goodbye.